Welcome back to another video here from Zendog Labs. My name is Raphael. I am the CEO of Zendog Labs. We are a growth consulting firm for startups. Today we're going to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about the B2B buying process. The B2B buying process matters for startups that are selling to other companies, especially if you are in an enterprise SaaS where deals are really tough, defined by long sales cycles, and the potential deal value, the average contract value is very high, typically above $1 million, but it could be anywhere starting at, let's say, $150K. Nonetheless, even if you're not an enterprise SaaS, getting really structured and deliberate about how buying processes work in B2B is critical in order to excel as a salesperson, as a sales executive. And ultimately, you as the founder, if you are a founder, are responsible for selling at your company. There is no one else that will take that from you. It is your job. Unless you are the technical person, it is your job. And if you are the technical person and you're the only founder, it is still your job. You have to sell. Selling is what makes B2B companies successful, and you have to get good at it. So today we're going to talk about the B2B buying process. The B2B buying process is based on a book that's called Major Account Sales Strategy that was written by Rackham. He has done tons of research into what makes people tick, what makes organizations tick, in order to come up with the B2B buying process and his framework that he calls spin questions. We're going to talk about both today. I was an enterprise SaaS. We were a risk analytics platform selling to life sciences organizations. Our average contract value started at least 150K, but more 500K up to multi-million enterprise deals. We had a really, really rough ride finding product market fit, finding the right types of customers, selling our product, and growing our products. I personally was selling to strategic accounts like Pfizer, J&J, Genentech, Novartis, Roche, Boehringer, all the big pharma companies that you know, and also the contract research organizations like Parexel and others. IQVIA is another example. And in addition to strategic accounts, I was also leading demand generation and partnerships, where I closed our first partnership with a company that's listed on the NASDAQ and 100 times our size, was 100 times our size at the time. So it was a rough ride. I learned quite a bit. You get good in difficult environments. So if you're thinking about how to enter B2B sales, enterprise SaaS, my recommendation to you is probably go into a startup. You are going to have a hard shot getting into enterprise SaaS otherwise, where you need to prove one, product market fit, and two, your ability to sell. These are very difficult challenges to overcome. So, that's how diamonds are forged, right? Under pressure. My name is Raphael. I'm, again, the CEO here at Zendog Labs. We're a growth consultancy for startups. Before, I was a principal at Roivant Health. Roivant Health is an investor operator in healthcare and technology that raised about $3 billion from VCs like SoftBank Vision Fund, Founders Fund, and Palantir. Palantir is a company, but Peter Thiel is an investor. And I dropped into many of our companies, including that risk analytics company that I talked about. And before joining Roivant about 5 years ago, I was a founder for startups myself, and ultimately also worked in banking and consulting for some time. So if you like this video, if you enjoy the content, drop a comment below, like the post, subscribe to our channel, and reach out to us if you have questions. Also, if you have questions, definitely feel free to drop a comment in the section below. Now we're going to switch over to our content right now. I have pulled this up here in the background, and I'm going to adjust my microphone so that I can look at the slide and you can keep hearing me in a proper way. So what you're seeing here is the B2B buying process. And the B2B buying process has really 4 steps. It starts at recognition of needs and ends at implementation. But I added to this the account entry strategy phase because I, as a sales rep, I was having a really, really tough time also, or in many cases, that was the hardest part of it all, in just getting into the company. Really tough in enterprise SaaS. So let's look at these in total 5 steps with the addition of the 1 step that I have added here. And ultimately, again, let me just repeat this. Go and read Major Account Sales Strategy. It is going to make a huge difference in your career as a B2B seller. Highly recommended. Now, the first phase, the account entry strategy phase, is really you thinking about how can I get into an account? There are different ways. You could start with, going outbound. In most startups, that's probably, as a salesperson, what you're going to do, right? Going outbound on social, email, going outbound via phone calls, though that's actually pretty tough to do. In most cases, you don't have the phone numbers of people. In our cases, we were big on conferences. That was a top driver of our number of leads. So you somehow have to find a way into the organization. And I know that there is always this debate about, should I enter at the top? Should I enter at the bottom? Ultimately, screw it. It doesn't matter. The one thing that matters is that you get to talk to the people. Now, what I have experienced in the past is if you enter too low, they tend to have a harder time to connect with their managers, and then from the managers you go to the VP, and from the VP you may end up with the CEO. It takes a long time going through that, and every single time your probabilities of success is really low. So entering at the top can be helpful, but if you come in via the CEO, let's say you go via warm introduction, it's high stakes immediately, and the CEO expects you to be knowledgeable about the industry, about the company, about the problems they're facing, for which you may not be ready yet. And then ultimately, many teams don't necessarily like to be told stuff by their CEO. Let's say you're a vendor of a software technology and you connected with a CEO that then goes to their project management team and tells them, hey, talk to this vendor. I want you to assess them, and then ultimately start using them. That's very tricky. In many cases, that's also why CEOs have kind of learned that they are not telling their teams what they're supposed to do. They're just suggesting technologies and things that they may be looking at. And then you are coming in from a pretty arrogant place if you went in via the CEO. Now, there are some organizations that are very hierarchical where this can work. I've seen it work, but my recommendation is probably shoot somewhere for the middle. You don't want to go with the intern. The intern can be helpful for getting information about the organization. You probably don't want to go with the CEO. So I think you're somewhere, at least at the manager, maybe at the SVP, EVP, but certainly the VP or the director or senior director level that you are going to go into the company and have a pretty solid footprint if you're entering there. Now, I suggest you to think about account entry strategy with the Bullseye framework. We're going to cover the Bullseye framework in a separate video. It essentially is a tool that was developed by the founder of DuckDuckGo that tells you how you can identify channels, marketing and sales channels for your company that work repeatedly. Now, once you've taken step one in the organization, you want to think about the focus of receptivity, you want to think about the focus of dissatisfaction, and the focus of power. These are potentially the same person, but potentially also three different people. Someone may be receptive to your message. It could be just a friendly chap that likes to chat with vendors. Not everyone likes to do that. And for instance, when I worked in life sciences and was selling to clinical operations people hate talking to vendors. They hate it. They will never reply. So they're not receptive people unless they're at trade shows, which is interesting. So we had to get creative about who we kind of talk to and try to get our foot into with. And then from there, you can start to learn about the organization, figure out what the problems are, figure out their situation, and then move over to the focus of dissatisfaction, to the people that actually have your problem. In our case, it was clinical operations and a specific group within clinical operations. And at that point, you already have a pretty solid understanding of what their needs and problems are. You can talk to them in a consultative way. You need to be a consultative seller in B2B nowadays in order to make a difference. You cannot be transactional in your sales pitch. And then from there, that person, if you're talking to a director, it's unlikely to be the person that's going to make the ultimate decision unless your product is a cheap product that's easy to adopt and there are no transaction and switching costs involved. But if you are an enterprise platform, that's very unlikely to be the person that makes the decision. Maybe it's the SVP, maybe it's even the COO, depending on the type of product that you're selling. And then you need to move to the focus of power. And sometimes you move to the focus of power, and in other cases, the focus of dissatisfaction is going to pitch for you to the focus of power. And that's a difficult one for which you need to prepare your focus of dissatisfaction to. So even once you enter the account, it gets very tactical about trying to figure out who you're talking to and how you move through the organization, how you map the organization on a key account chart and identify the different types of people that you're talking to. Now, as we transition into what's more the traditional buying process along the four phases, the recognition of needs phase, evaluation of options phase, the resolution of concerns phase, and then implementation, let's start with recognition of needs. As a consultative seller, your job primarily is to understand and nurture what the needs and the problems are that your customer is facing. You want to get them to a place where their perceived need is so high that it crosses a certain threshold where they want to take action. I'm sure you as a buyer, as a consumer, have many times recognized what a threshold is. Let's say you want to buy a car, you live in a city, you don't really have a need for a new car, then you move outside the city and you start feeling the pain. It takes a little bit of time, you start to think about it, you start to talk to friends, and then ultimately at some point you say, well, fuck this, I'm going to buy a new car. and you're going to go into the evaluation of options phase. That's where you need to get your buyer to, recognizing that need and appreciating it as important enough to take action on it. Now, one helpful way for making that happen is this other framework that I talked to you about that Neil Rackham developed, which is SPIN questions. And SPIN questions stands for situation, problem, implication, need, payoff, questions. Sorry, that was a little bit too fast here. Situation questions are questions where you're just trying to figure out what's going on at the company. Problem questions is where you're digging into what the problems are that they're facing. Let's say they have an existing solution that they adopted, what they don't like about that solution. Implication questions are questions where you try to figure out, what does this problem actually mean for you? Let's say you have a CRM at Salesforce, you don't like the design, it's clunky to use. What does that mean to you? Well, it means to you that your sales reps are less engaged with the platform, they don't enjoy it as much. All right, these are implication questions. And then you move over to the most impactful question, which are need payoff question. Once you have identified that Salesforce is an unengaging and clunky CRM software, which is my experience with Salesforce, you can tell them you can essentially ask a question like, how valuable would it be for you if I were to give you a CRM that drives up engagement with the CRM by 50% so that you have substantially more information on your leads as the leader of the sales organization? That's a pretty impactful question. Another example that I was personally asked when I talked to the salespeople of Neil Rackham, because he does sales trainings and I wanted to do one, it's pretty expensive, was, how valuable would it be for you if your organization in an enterprise SaaS where your average contract value is, close to $1 million, how valuable would it be for you if you close an additional 2 deals per quarter? An additional 2 deals per quarter at that value for a startup would have changed the game for us. It would have been so valuable that and it would have made me so happy that I couldn't even think and express my joy over it. And that's the type of feeling that he wanted me to get to. And obviously I then ran off to our CBO and our CEO pitching them on this training that I wanted to do. And in order to ask these questions, in order to avoid situation questions, you need to be a domain expert and you need to be a challenger. You need to have it in your guts to challenge someone, to be a consultant, to tell them, hey, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. One way of obviously shortcutting this is by talking to the focus of receptivity and trying to figure out what's going on in the organization before you go and sell into it. So that's the recognition of needs phase. The evaluation of options phase is about helping your buyer, your lead, make the decision. They will have certain decision criteria. Let's say you want to buy a car, you think maybe about horsepower, you think about the brand, about the price, and the car that you're selling as a car seller may be good in certain of these dimensions, but not most likely, as most products are, not good in everything. Every product has weaknesses and strengths. And so your buyer comes in with a set of, and also as they learn more about what they're trying to buy, will add additional criteria and comes in with a set of criteria that they're thinking of and have ranked in a hierarchical order, at least implicitly without maybe thinking about it, with regard to importance. You need to figure out what these evaluation criteria are and help them order it in such a way that your product stands out. Let's say I'm selling BMWs, we have strong machines, but they're expensive. My buyer's criteria is not to spend too much money, but they want a cool car that they can show off to their friends. Well, I need to talk them through, hey, how would it feel for you if you could take the car over to your friends? It's a convertible. You can take off the roof of the car. You can drive somewhere to the beach, have nice music, and really hit the pedal to the metal. Well, I would start thinking about, hey, that's a cool proposition. I wouldn't be so concerned about the price anymore. It could also be reputation, right? My parents bought a Volvo because it's such a safe car. I hate Volvo. It sucks to drive it. But for them, safety mattered. It was a pretty expensive car, but safety mattered so much that they were willing to pay for it. And I'm saying that as someone where their family was BMW all their lives. So that was a pretty big deal. And that's what you do in the evaluation of options phase. And then you move over to resolution of concerns. In resolution of concerns, you will typically encounter problems like leads starting to talk about, the price is too high. Well, that's a reflection. Typically, when they talk about price, it's a reflection that they have certain underlying concerns that you haven't fully addressed yet and identified yet. It could be as simple as something like, I'm going to adopt this enterprise SaaS technology. It's going to lead to major changes in our processes and how our teams operate. It's a big deal for us. What if this goes wrong? Put aside what this means for the company if it goes wrong. What does that mean for my career? And why would I trust you, dear sales reps, which, by the way, are all over-promising and most of the times, lying to you? Why would I trust you with that deployment and with giving me technology that actually works. You need to figure out and help them resolve these concerns. You do not need to, and in fact, you should not just not need to, you should not resolve them for them. So your goal in this phase is not to say something like, all right, so we found out that, you're a little concerned about the implementation risk of this technology. I have run you through our deployment process, and I think we probably both agree that it's actually not such a big risk and that we have a pretty structured process. Do you agree with that, dear buyer? And then the buyer says, yeah, I actually agree with that. That's not the type of thing you want to get to. You want to get to the buyer proactively articulating to you that they feel like you have resolved their underlying concerns, whatever they are. And from there, you can move over into implementation. At that point, you've done a great job of selling the product. Now that you're at implementation, you actually need to go back to square one and just excel at customer excellence. Customer excellence is a very important function in all B2B sales organizations, especially in enterprise sales. And what you're doing here is, you're making sure that the customer is getting what they're paid for in the way they're perceiving it, not in the way that you described it. A good way of making sure that deployment works is, and by the way, you do this as a salesperson. You don't just hand over. You try to be involved. You try to, catch up with your customer. You try to make sure that customer success is everything that they need. If there is even a customer success function, many startups don't have one, candidly. One way of effectively kind of navigating issues in the planning phase is by involving the customer in the planning process. So telling them, here is my preliminary draft for what the deployment process is going to look like. What do you think about it? Are we missing something? What do you think about the timeline? Any other suggestions? And then once they're bought into the process that you came up with in the implementation phase, they will be more tolerant toward problems that are definitely going to come up. I have never seen a deployment of a complex piece of technology that went without any problems. And also the commitment to the outputs will be higher. It's a little bit like a consultant, right? As a consultant, you have to make sure that you kind of grab the clients that you're talking to and pull them along with you through the discovery journey of whatever you're consulting them on, that they ultimately agree to what you told them. Otherwise, you're not making any change and it's useless. Another thing that it should not be underestimated in the implementation phase is that you help or that you constantly evaluate and continue to evaluate. I mean, first of all, you constantly keep talking to your customer. And then secondly, you constantly continue to evaluate what their needs are and how they're changing. Because your competitors will do that. They're trying to snatch that customer from you. It's a valuable deal. Even if you sign a multi-year agreement, they will potentially, even 1 year before it expires, already talk to your customer. And if they're doing a better need at evaluation of options and recognition of needs, you're going to be out. So your duty as a salesperson is continuing that conversation. So these are the 4 steps plus account entry strategy. What the only weakness is that the buying process as described here doesn't cover is sort of the negotiation phase where you're talking about price of a product and negotiate that. You try to push that after the resolution of concerns phase and obviously before the implementations phase, where the way you talk about negotiation is you bring it up at the very last moment, the price as a point that you negotiate. You can put pricing on your website before, but you're not willing to discuss it unless you have made sure that your buyer knows why your product is as valuable as you think it is. At that point, your competition likely has already fired off discounts. You're still in the race without having given a discount. And now you can get across the finishing line by giving a small discount. Probably a much smaller discount than you otherwise would have to give in order to get here. And a much more impactful one. And then sort of a pro tip here is as you go down in pricing and offering discounts, don't give out your full discount immediately. Start with small steps that get smaller over time so that the customer does feel that this is all that you can give out in terms of discounts. Right. Last comment. As you think about your CRM, right? We talked about Salesforce. It could be HubSpot. It could be Zendesk, and one of the million other CRMs that are out there. What I've seen personally as an operator, but also as a consultant, is that many startups will define their pipelines by phases like engaging a lead, qualifying a lead, demoing a lead, follow-up conversation, having sent a proposal, having closed or won the deal. I mean, obviously that's logical. But all of these steps before are really aligned with what you're doing as a seller. But the buyer doesn't care about these steps. You need to get them through at least these 4 steps that I'm describing here. And I think it's a much more valuable proposition to define the phases in your CRM along these steps. Because you may have sent a proposal to someone who you haven't even established need with yet. That's a vanity metric then. You're not going to win that deal. It's just impossible. So, my heartfelt recommendation to everyone in sales and all the sales manager and leaders out there, do not follow vanity metrics. Be really diligent about your pipeline. Accept that things take longer. Accept that B2B sales is hard, especially in enterprise. And, don't follow vanity metrics. So that's it. We went through a really cool framework that has changed my career and has been really, really helpful when I was completely lost when I first started in enterprise sales. Hope it helps you too. Go read Major Account Sales Strategy. It does make a difference for you. And get back to us if you have questions. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and drop us an email if we can help you in any way whatsoever. Have a great day.